So my name is Sarah Howarth. I am an assistant professor at the University of Maine in Orono, and I am also the current president of the ISET subdivision of CEC. And I want to thank Dr. Marilyn Friend and Dr. Lisa Deeker for joining us this evening and agreeing to serve as our two experts on our ISET expert panel on co-teaching during COVID. Many of you have already submitted some questions. So the way this evening will work is I will ask you to remain muted just because there are quite a few of you right now we have 75 people who have joined us and we have more than 200 people who have registered. I am recording, so if you do not want your camera on, just be aware that you can mute your video as well if you're not comfortable. And also, as I ask each question, I will allow Lisa and Marilyn to answer the questions, and I will be monitoring the chat box for more questions that might come in. But first, I wanted to go ahead and let Lisa and Marilyn just sort of introduce themselves. Lisa, do you want to start?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I love the array of masks, headphones, dogs, cats, kids, and whatever else we might get to see in a Zoom world today. I am with you in, used to be sunny, now it's cloudy, rainy, Orlando, Florida. We did get a lot of hurricane yesterday, but mostly limbs down. And I'm a professor at the University of Central Florida, where I have 3 jobs. I'll summarize them quickly. I run the PhD program in special ed. I run the Lockheed Martin Mathematics and Science Academy. I'm an endowed professor with Lockheed Martin. And I run the Center for Research in Education, Simulation, and Technology, basically AKA a bit of a nerd in the techno space. So thrilled to be with you, and thanks for having me, Sarah.
Well, welcome. And again, I wanted to also allow Dr. Marilyn Friend to introduce herself to us before we start with the questions this evening. Dr. Friend, would you like to give a little introduction and tell us who you are for those who don't know?
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here, but you threw me for a loop. I thought we were 3:45 on our start time. I'm like, wait.
We're slowly letting people come in.
Got it. Lisa must have gotten out of her meeting a little bit earlier. I am Marilyn Friend. I am a past president of CEC. I am an ISET member. I spent my career in general ed and special ed and in the university, most of my career in the university, about a third of that as a department chair. I now do freelance consulting pretty much all over the country and a few other countries as well, trying to help people figure out what to do, how to make it better, how to make all of this work and make sure that we get the outcomes that we want for kids. And so I am coming to you right now. Actually, Lisa, I'm in Florida. I'm coming to you from Florida, but not near Orlando, and kind of base here and also in Washington, DC, and work from there.
Excellent. Well, as I was waiting for everyone to join us, I wanted to let you both know that we currently have 90 people who have joined us. We have more than 200 people who have registered.
Oh my.
I know, I am so pleased, but I think it's also a testament to your fandom for the two of you as rock stars, but also the fact that we have many teachers throughout our nation who are looking for some support. And so I know, as you and Lisa and I have talked about by email, we are sort of building the plane while we're flying it during the national pandemic, because I don't think any of us in our lifetimes have experienced this.
I actually have a slide somewhere that says that this is a plane we're flying and building at the same time. So you're right on that.
Right. So what I will do is I will monitor the questions as they come in. But I wanted to start with a question that was emailed to us, and I will let you each decide who would like to, tackle each question as they come. But this one is very interesting. It says 99% of co-teaching is collaboration, right? And any teaching, right, for that matter, with special education and all students. Most people know how to collaborate, but time is the colossal challenge during co-teaching in a regular environment. What tools can you share for planning that make planning for co-teaching more efficient in our current situation?
Lisa, do you want to start or do you want me to?
Marilyn, go ahead. I'll follow. How's that sound?
All right. You're right. Collaboration is important, but I think we also have to be very aware of the fact that time is a precious commodity and that we have to plan like it's the 21st century and not 1978. And I don't say that as a criticism, but in education, we tend to think that if we're not face-to-face live, whether electronic or brick and mortar, that it's not really planning. And my best comment on what to do about planning time is to advocate for yourselves to have periodic planning time, sometimes with coverage, sometimes with a sub, sometimes getting credit for it, it's that staff development credit, sometimes getting a stipend for it, and plan for 2, 3, 4 weeks, big picture planning. I have a huge concern about planning for co-teaching. People want to sit down and outline every single part of every single lesson. And frankly, I'm presuming many of you are special educators, and special ed teachers need to be spending the bulk of their time planning the specially designed instruction. And if you spend all the minutes on general ed planning, you have no minutes left for special ed planning. So my vote is periodic face-to-face. I don't even ask administrators to schedule you every day or every week anymore. Periodic, good quality time. And then, and I'll turn it over to Lisa for this because I'm sure she can talk about it, good quality planning in the cloud using, Lisa, you want to take that part?
Yeah, using whatever works for both of you. My favorite, Marilyn, was one of the teams I was working with said, my partner is not a Google Docker. they don't go out into Google Docs. And I said, what?
I like that person. I get so tired of Google Docs.
And so they text each other. So again, I don't care if it's texting, but find something that works for you. If it's even old school paper, I'm okay with that. But I think what the mistake we've made, as Marilyn said so well, is we've made it too complicated. I do recommend 2 other things just to add to the great things Marilyn's already said is 1, don't get caught up in kid-specific discussions during your planning, because otherwise you won't plan for anybody. You'll spend that whole 30 minutes talking about that kid that's on your last nerve, and the other 22 students in your class don't get any time. So do make sure your planning is focused on planning and not problem solving for all the things in the minutia. The second one that I like is when all else fails, I jokingly say, don't say good morning to me when I walk in the room. I simply say, please tell me the bullseye for the day. I assume I'm pretty smart. And if you just say to me, we're working on nouns and verbs, I know what those are. Now, if we're balancing a, quadratic equation with, mixed numbers and, I might need an example from that. But even then I know something about words. I know something about language. And I think if we remember 2 things, what's our A game? What are each of us bringing that we're really good at? Then I can bring that if I know what I'm bringing it to. I literally just was with a team today that the PE teacher and the elementary teachers are co-teaching. How exciting is that? Like that is like the ultimate. But here's what I love. They were like, well, we keep bringing in the PE. And I'm like, but have you asked what their content is? And so, sharing that in PE, we're working on kicking a soccer ball. And in math, we're working on a square. Guess what? We can talk about kicking a soccer ball in a square. It's that blending of the things that you need in the IEP space. And then the last piece I would just add there is it's improv. If you've ever watched good improv, co-teaching is improv. If you were to script out every last thing we were going to do, we would need about 7 days of planning. So again, if you haven't ever read or watched videos on the principles of improv, things such as, standing close to each other as a cue, or if you're online, leaning into the camera saying it's my turn, those kinds of cues that you would give in brick and mortar, we should be doing online. And I think, so as you plan, I think you should plan for what your target is, but where each of you are in that space. I think sometimes we get caught up in the minutia instead of let's trust we both have strengths and how we're going to bring those into the environment.
And I'll maybe I can kind of wrap this with a little bit of a caution for you. And I'm going to go back to what I said before about special educators are in co-taught environments for the purpose of delivering special ed services. And while certainly both people work with all kids, You help each other with your primary responsibilities. And yet we want to be very certain that improv is great. And I agree, there are days, especially right now, when it's like, just get till the end of the day when I can have an adult beverage. That's perfectly okay. Over time, though, special educators almost need to have their own kind of scope and sequence so that they know where they're going with kids. And then all the good things that Lisa has been saying fit together. If you are looking for a planning tool for the cloud, one that is not very expensive and is worth it for some people. I don't know, Lisa, I find a lot of teachers are using planbook.com because it's $15 for a year. It has all your state standards. You can, if you use it a second year, you can roll lessons one year to the next. You can bump things, you can move things back. It's very versatile. And if you actually would like a planning template, that is a very good one. You can plan on a Google Calendar. There are tons of ways that people actually do the planning process. But Lisa hit on it, and it's this notion of you do your big planning, you have your bullseye, I like that, or your target, where are we going? And then the other thing is, if you're really like, oh my word, what is going on? You can always put kids to work for 2 minutes and threaten them with their lives and basically buy yourselves 2 minutes of talk time if you need that quick touch base. So if you would do kind of the periodic face-to-face plan in the cloud and then have that what to do when it's on the spot and you have to use those improv strategies, then you'll be okay and we can all calm down about it. And we'll be planning a lot more the way planning goes on in the world of business and other professions in the 21st century.
I'm going to piggyback real quick on that too, Marilyn. I love that. I'm always a big believer that really special ed teachers, we have to make sure the IEP is a living, breathing document. Yes. And so one of the things I didn't mention is I'm a parent of a young man with Tourette syndrome. And, I didn't want to know his reading goal for the day. I also wanted to know, did he meet his goal of not being angry at anybody today and showing up on time and doing something for himself? And could you come home with me and make him do that too? So those things, that's what's really unfair is our kids with disabilities have 2 curricula and we often always co-teach, yes. Often just co-teach to one. Yes. So thinking about how we marry those 2. And then I loved, Marilyn, your concept of these little sites. I say, think about it like in the court. When things are going wrong in a court, that they say, can we have a sidebar? Well, we should be having lots of sidebars when, you got 3 kids throwing things at you and you're like melting. You're like, all right, Marilyn, can I have a sidebar with you? And we chat for a moment. I think that we don't do enough of that planning within instruction, but if you're by yourself, you do that all the time. Yeah. You're like, yeah, it's not going well. I'm going to stop right here. So it's that reflection in action that I think teams that really evolve start to do it. And I think, as we both know, that means we aren't co-teaching with somebody new every week. If we can stay together for a whole year, it's amazing. And if it could be 2 to 3 years, that's when you really see the sweet spot. Planning is less and roles go up.
Good points.
I really like some of the points that you've made. One, the big overarching theme is to start with that target, do the backwards planning. What is your end goal? But I also like how you both mentioned that you can have those sidebars and you can have those kind of timeouts, to use a sports analogy, where you don't have to wait for a planning time to communicate, right? And there's that nonverbal communication that we develop that's also part of that, stand up or improv relationship, that when you're really co-teaching well, you'll be able to communicate with just that teacher look, like, okay, that one I've got this, okay, you've got that sort of nonverbal communication going on. So these are great. We have a related question that is targeted specifically to people who are teacher educators right now. And I'm sure you've received lots of these questions from people in the teacher education division of CEC, but perhaps you could address some considerations for student teaching or practicum students who are in inclusive co-taught classrooms right now. And I'm sure we have quite a few university professors who are teacher educators in this situation. If you could just sort of talk about some some topics that have come up, some workarounds for collaborating as a pre-teacher or a teacher candidate.
Lisa, off you go.
Okay, I'll just start with something very simple. These wonderful ladies called Friend and Cook, gave us these great types of co-teaching. And, I often think of a student teacher a little bit like I do a para. That, not that I don't think a para can't be a really valuable asset, but if they're not fully certified, or even if they are and we're not paying them, I often say we should think carefully about what they can do. I think part of what we haven't done is good induction for co-teaching for student teaching. Like, okay, you're going to be my equal. Well, probably not if I've been teaching for 20 years and you aren't even certified. Yet sometimes we set our student teachers up for that. So I think some gradual release for co-teaching, I don't think we've done that well. And I've seen people talk about doing that in their programs, but I don't think we have just doing one lead, one support, and one observe. It, to me, is where that person should start. But sometimes I think their expectation is they should be a team member. And I think the special ed teacher tries to do that too. And I think some clarity in the beginning is one thing I would recommend. And then the second thing, in an online environment, since we're talking about that, I think we need even better clarity, because maybe they're the best person to do the Zooming and the audio and the breakouts and the chats, because maybe they have a skill set we don't. But I think it goes right back to what I said earlier. What's their A game? If they're really good at these things, let's gradually release those earlier than things they don't have a clue about. And that's always my concern for student teacher.
And I guess I would add to that, the pattern that I'm seeing from everybody I'm talking to is quite a bit of begin student teaching with the special educator running the group as a partner to the teacher in the group. As that becomes more comfortable and as skills are evident and need to be practiced, then moving to perhaps a station where both teachers and the student teacher would have a station, but starting that with review, with practice on something already taught, with some debriefing going on as that evolves, because a student teacher still needs to see the proficient master teachers in their environment. And because COVID has done such strange things to how this is all working, student teachers do need time to observe, as Lisa said. They should have data charts and be looking at student participation. I don't know how everybody is. I know in some places kids are on screens, and in other places it's a privacy issue. And even with backgrounds and all the workarounds, some places kids are not on their screens at all. Well, then maybe it's starting with some small things like monitoring participation. Maybe it's interjecting to say, we haven't heard from you, George, and doing almost like parameters around the entire scope, especially of being a virtual teacher, and negotiating that somewhat in terms of comfort level and ready to move on. But I agree with Lisa completely. I think we have to be really careful that we don't say, whoever you are, it's now all the same, it's all equal, there's nothing that you need to do except be a member of the team, because these are not us educators. And if all it took was suddenly showing up after your pre-service prep, then what are we doing? And so I do think that we have to plan a trajectory. There may be some need to kind of help some student teachers understand protocol and norms for being a teacher in a virtual environment, because that's not necessarily automatic. Talking with a couple people about some kind of too informal situations with their student teachers. And so I would also toss that in. I think teacher educators right now, like everybody, have a tremendous chore, a tremendous task. And it's almost where's the checklist of being a virtual teacher, and how do we start working our way through that with student teachers so that at the end of this, they're pretty proficient electronically. At the same time, though, we also have to be devoting time to what it's like when it's going back to brick and mortar, because, I hope everybody's on the same page I am. Please let it go back to brick and mortar for the sake of kids and everybody's mental health. before too long. I'm guessing some of you in a group this big, some of you are probably brick and mortar. I was doing PD in a virtual PD last week, and the school's brick and mortar full time. Oh my word. But I know a lot of people are hybrid and other things. And so we also have to be sure student teachers who are student teaching now are also ready for what's different in brick and mortar. So I'd throw that in as well.
Right, so you brought up collecting data and having sort of progress monitoring sheets. And of course, that leads right into our very next question for protocols that perhaps you might recommend on progress monitoring in co-taught classes. Now, I know that there are lots of tools and resources available out there, you know, Google Docs being one and Google Classroom being one. But I wasn't sure if you had anything that you had both used together, because it just seems there's so many options out there. How does a teacher just decide, you know, with her co-teacher what they're going to do?
Go ahead, Marilyn, I'll follow you.
Okay, I'm going to do a brief startup and then turn it over to Lisa. One of the things that I think we almost need to back up a step, because everybody's worried about progress monitoring. The first concern is, have students received the services to which they are entitled? And as you know, there are many advocates out there who I'm surprised they don't have billboards up, call 1-800-SUE-THE-DISTRICT, because there are advocates who are looking to demonstrate that children with IEPs are not receiving the services that they should be getting, a violation of FAPE. Many districts, it's also a little bit tricky to answer this because different states have set different policies about exactly what happens with the IEPs, especially when you're in virtual. But even when you're brick and mortar, and I don't know, I'm working with a place where, ready for this, teachers have a little square box that they have to stand in, and they may not leave that box at any time when they have students. And so unless you're in the front row of kids who all have to face the same way, who sees you and who can help and interact with you? And so the first piece is making sure that if somebody came and said, what are you doing that constitutes specialized instruction, that there is an answer. I think the partner to that is what Lisa said before, and it was a really good point, Lisa, that it's not just academics. We're responsible for whole child. And so that we have to be looking at social skills and behavioral skills and all the executive function, organization, you know, task switching, all the other things that go into that. And so when we talk about progress monitoring, first, what is it that we're monitoring? Are we sure what is being done that's actually active intervention designed to address the IEP goal? Then if you say, well, how do you collect the data? I think a lot of informal and formative type of data for progress monitoring right now is almost always the way to go, because many instruments are not valid if they're administered remotely. Lisa, let me quit and turn it over to you.
I mean, again, ditto. Let me share like some real simple things I've seen people do. And I actually did a little co-teaching when COVID hit myself online with a couple of friends, just because I was bored. All of a sudden wasn't going anywhere. And I was like, all right, what does this feel like? And so a couple of things I chose to do was I did engagement, and I would look at the Zoom and could check and see. And you know, it's very funny. You can send kids away for 5 minutes, but I got a little tip for you. I'm really big on saying, you know, go find me 10 of something in your house and bring it back. It happened to be a math class. But I would say when you bring it back, if you don't want to turn on your camera, because I know some districts have policies for, you know, then you must chat me some compliment about how wonderful I am in the chat, or you have to turn your camera on for at least 10 seconds. And I gave kids a choice. But it was funny because immediately then I could check and say, well, that kid's sleeping. So now what do we do about that? And again,
Lisa, before you go on, can I add to that? Because
yes, please.
One of the things that happens right now, and you're talking right to this point, is that purist Marilyn, and I'm sure purist Lisa, says most time in co-teaching should be small groups. Realist Marilyn knows there's more whole group instruction than I wish. What Lisa just described to you is a very appropriate way for a special educator, when a general educator is leading a whole group lesson, to have an active role, be addressing that progress monitoring. And I will tell you, I've been doing an awful lot of work lately on how to raise student participation, because so many kids are ghosting. And that's probably because who cares? You know, nobody's really looking and my camera's off. And so what Lisa is talking about in terms of the participation and the cameras and the go get things for the engagement, that's a really critical part of this, especially if you're working, if you're a special ed teacher and you're with a kind of reluctant partner and you have a lot of whole group, because I'm hearing it all over the place. Kindergarten through 12th grade. We have so few minutes online with on screen. We have to have all of that for whole group instruction because we can't afford to have anything else. And so people are getting put in boxes where it's harder to have a partnership role because of the whole setup. Sorry, Lisa, to interrupt, but it's like, yes.
No, not an interrupt. That's called collaboration. And I love it. I think it's exactly a great point there. And so that's exactly what I was thinking too, Marilyn, as you said so well. So again, I don't know if this is true in your districts, but it's what I'm hearing is I can't put kids in breakout groups unless I'm in them. So I can't let them do cooperative groups because we can't trust them. Well, okay, so I get that. But here's what I recommend. We can still station teach. I can do breakout 1, you can do breakout 2. Are you ready for breakout 3? Leave the camera and go do something in your house. Go build me a bridge, go and bring it back, but make it so exciting kids will come back. Because that's the other mistake, asking them to leave and, fill in a worksheet, they're probably not coming back. But if you ask them to leave and build something or bring something back that's of value, and how does it compare to the main character of the story, that's what we found got kids to come back. So think about that, because you can have breakout groups. You can have really fun, choose your own adventure of these 3 websites for 10 minutes and take a picture to prove to me you did something during that station that's an independent station. And the reason I love to do that off camera is because then we could have kids stay with us on camera. You can stay with me and do my group twice because you didn't get it the first time. That's what specially designed instruction is all about. If I get a kid,
and then you can gather your data while they're with you and do the conversations and the work samples and the checklists and talk to the kids. You can have 2 kids talking to each other and you can be monitoring social skills right on your camera.
Love it. And then the last one I'll just kind of mention is one of my personal favorites. One of the districts has the easiest thing I've ever seen. And it's a simple checklist, already pre-printed, kids' names, little place, and you do a check plus or minus for academic skill, social, emotional / IEP skill for every kid. And there's a place to write notes. It's laminated so that it can be wiped off and used. But here's what I love. At the end of the class, doesn't matter if it's online or brick and mortar. And I think that's the other mistake we've made. We try to make brick and mortar so different than online. They should be the same. We do a lot here with Florida Virtual School. We don't train teachers to be different when we're student teaching in Florida Virtual School than we do in brick and mortar schools. They still have to do online content, monitor IEPs. So thinking about that, but here's what they do every day: check plus or minus, kid's name, and any kid who's a minus, it is their job to talk about what they're going to do at the end of class to get that kid to at least a check. Mm-hmm. So again, it's not just progress monitoring, it's progress monitoring with purpose that we're co-assessing during instruction. So I think that our progress monitoring we make difficult. It's just like that bullseye. I think we have a bullseye for IEP goals and things, we can then check it off very easily. But that means we have to have some kind of simple data charts that we're using on a regular basis.
Something else that you can do that can help on the data collection, and I know I'm kind of like in left field here, but everybody is using Padlet and Kahoot and Seesaw and ClassKick and all these other apps. There's nothing that says that has to be done for the whole class group. It could be that you should gather data by interacting with a smaller group of kids and using one of those apps. One that I'm liking right now, because it's not an app, it's a website. I don't know if probably some of you know about it at least. It's called whiteboard.fi. And it's great because it's completely free. It's not an app. You don't have to download it. Kids don't have to know how to access it. There are no big passwords that have to be remembered. And what it is it gives you a virtual whiteboard, and it gives each kid you're working with. I'm seeing a small group right now. By the way, a small group, whether you're virtual or you're hybrid, and you have some virtual, some brick and mortar, or you're brick and mortar but socially distanced, you have every kid has a whiteboard. They cannot see each other's, but you can see all of the kids' whiteboards. And it's a way that you can have kids, you can do some assessing, you can have kids brainstorm ideas. After they do it, you can clear the whiteboards. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do with it. You should go look at it if you're not familiar with it and you're looking for something simple.
Can you just say the name one more time?
Yeah, it's whiteboard.f, like Frank, I, whiteboard.fi. And it is currently one of my favorites because it's so simple. It's kind of a stripped down version of Class Kick, but it's totally free. And because you never even give your email address, you can't get spam. It's my idea of a perfect way to work. And it's simple tech. What you do is you copy the URL once you create your class for the day, and then you put it in your chat box and the kids just click on that, and that's how they get in. You can also, if you're gathering data for progress monitoring, you could do a whiteboard session with kids and you can save their whiteboards as a PDF so that then you would have your documentation of what you assessed. It's worth looking at. It's one of my favorites and not everybody knows about it. So, and it's simple. That's the best part. It's very intuitive and you can get some good mileage out of that if you're trying to collect data.
That's fantastic. I like the idea of response cards, really, just virtually.
Yeah.
And I know Lisa probably has other resources that she can share. So I'll let her share that before I talk about low tech.
Yeah, I was going to say I was going to go to low tech. So thank you. But what that's in the middle too. And again, you know, I like anything that's free. So I'm always big on sharing free. You've probably seen Class Dojo. But what I don't think we've done well is, I don't know if you know, you can make a dojo just for IEP goals. So again, what I love is now the kids sitting at home and not paying attention, I can send them a message through Class Dojo. I can do the same through Remind. So if you haven't looked at those two sites, but one of the things we did, again, it was a Title I school we were working in math, is we sent home to every kid a solo plastic plate, a black sock and a black marker, and the kids could write their answers and hold it on the screen. We also then use Plickers, and I didn't realize it, but Plickers will work on Zoom too.
Really?
So, yes, but you have to go kind of big screen and you have to be, but again, think about those kinds of things that are really simple because again, now the kid can touch it. My other little tip for the solo plastic plates is add some Velcro. So while kids are sitting, they've got a little bit of a sensory piece there that they can be rubbing while you're teaching. So again, those are some things that I found helpful.
And if you're working with older kids and solo plates aren't going to work, depends on the kids. Also, I know many places that are periodically letting kids collect supplies. I have beseeched many special ed directors to purchase massive quantities of small whiteboards and send home whiteboards with a couple of markers. That's good all the way into high school because the kids will work on them and kids like them and it's really low tech. If that's outside the budget, okay, I'm going really low. How about a package of sheet protectors with a white piece of paper slipped in? Teacher, Donna, you're nodding, I see you. It's like, you know, the really old-fashioned special ed teacher innovative ideas that are virtually, I mean, it's below low tech, it's sub low tech, can also help because kids holding things up to a screen, that's a good thing. I don't know if you know this, but there's some research out there, it's been several years now, that recommends that kids should be, during ideal times, kids should be interacting with what they're learning 3 times per minute. Like, take that in. Not 3 times during a class session, 3 times per minute, which means like the things that Lisa was saying earlier, like go get 10 of this, or, you know, do 5 jumping jacks and then settle down if you agree. And all of those different things, anything we can do to get kids to do something will help. And screens are harder. They're harder for kids. There's early research coming out. We know that. So any of the low tech or the mid tech sorts of things we can do will help kids, whether they're learning social skills or they're learning academics.
I love all of these ideas. I do want to kind of stay with the whole idea of opportunities to respond for a minute, because I know there was some discussion when we were talking about doing this expert panel on our ISET board that we were hoping to pick your brains about ideas, just like the response cards that you were talking about, for making sure that teachers can provide those rich, ratios for opportunities to respond during virtual classrooms.
Can I want to do just one, and then I'm going to be quiet and let Lisa do the rest of the session. I will tell you one that is based on the fact that right now, given how complex the situation is for students with IEPs, we know that direct explicit instructional practices should be the core of how kids are being taught, and that's not the case in every place. One part of direct explicit instruction is very frequent participation, and one way to achieve that is through choral responding in all its variations. If some of you are co-teaching, and again, because I'm seeing it in some places, it's more whole group and less get into breakout groups, then what people should do is talk to their teaching partner, say, you know what? I went to this 1-hour workshop on co-teaching virtually, and here's an idea that we have got to try. And you explain that you are going to frequently interrupt to have kids repeat vocabulary, key phrases, the sentence, read the directions out loud, all of those things that we know are participation that will get you closer to the 3 times per minute and that are really considered evidence-based practice, especially for kids with IEPs. It won't hurt any kid. For kids with IEPs, it can make and break them for that component of direct explicit instruction. That's not all of DEI, but that's a chunk.
I love it. And again, I agree 1000%. We cannot, as Marilyn said, give kids enough direct instruction. And I think when we think they're online, we can't do that, whether that's a short breakout, that's adding and kindly interrupting our peer. Again, what I did is I moved in here, to the camera to say, hello, you're talking too long. So come up with what your cue is going to be for your co-teacher to kind of make that work. Some other things that I've seen, I love the choral responding, Marilyn. I saw great success with spirit reading, where you say whomever the spirit moves starts reading, but by the end of the paragraph, you have to stop. Well, if a kid doesn't know the word photosynthesis, they can just stop reading, and then there's silence. Silence in the world of Zoom is like, no. And so all the kids then start to read. So you get this engagement at a different level. Some other quick fun ones that I found, to help even with kids when they're offline. If you've never seen the tomato timer, it's called the Pomodoro Method. Again, really helpful for families when they're working with kids, trying to get them engaged and trying to get that sustained engagement. Asking kids, hey, turn on the Pomodoro timer and let's see if you can really be engaged with me for 15 minutes. And then we'll take a 5-minute break. Again, are we building in those breaks in the classroom? If you saw everybody falling asleep, you do a break. Are you doing it there? My favorite break, my co-teacher did, she did chair push-ups. So I got pretty good, strong arms. And she would do, 5 chair push-ups times 50. And you have to put the answer in the chat. And the first one to do it, gets a point, whatever. But again, kids were like, okay, I got to do my push-ups fast and do the math problem at the same time. And then the last one I was just going to add there is, thinking about, oh gosh, I lost it. No, I'm right back there. Thinking about what you want them to look like. I think that's another thing we assume is kids with disabilities know what they should look like online. Well, the dog's barking and the TV's on, and so are you having those discussions with them about their Zoom environment? And are you modeling it for them? Good lighting, their chair should be adjusted. I think we assume that they either are doing that or they don't, but maybe they don't know how. And so I think just like we should be having that discussion with ourselves, we should have it with our whole class. What's your chair look like? What's your setting look like? What's your backpack look like? You would ask that in a brick and mortar. We should be doing the same online.
Sarah, can I talk for just a minute? And it's because it's Lisa's fault because she cued me about this whole thing about engagement and drawing kids in.
I would love for you to talk more about that.
Something else, and I'm sure, Lisa, that you've got other ideas. Something else that is kind of a big deal right now is when we're trying to not just engage kids, but We also have to realize cognitive load is a big issue. Many of the kids are not intrinsically motivated. It's not every kid. It's the kids where, you lie awake at nights worrying about. And that we really need to revisit special ed roots about really strong reward systems for kids. Individual kids, perhaps with a contract, where if they do this, then they get that. And go back to the old-fashioned contracts where we have bonus clauses and consequences and clearly stated reward systems, with kids choosing and participating because they're more likely to join if they know there's something about it, something in it for them. My favorite reward the past 3 weeks that I've heard is funded by the special ed director. But when the kids participate in class, their name is put into a drawing, and the prize at the end of the week is Uber Eats delivering to your house. Pretty cool. That's high school kids.
I want to get in on that.
I thought that was
that prize.
I thought that was a pretty good motivator. And, I've heard elementary teachers.
These people are awesome. I love them so much. At one point, this lady, at one point, they actually said, they're talking about co-teaching. And they said, if you do not have time to plan and you don't know what you're going to do, find something for the kids to do, threaten their lives so that they're quiet.
Cassie, I think you're on. Did you mean to unmute?
Oh, well.
No, I was actually just telling my daughter how awesome you guys were, because she just walked in. I'm like, oh my God.
We like reinforcement. Right, Marilyn? That's what you were just saying, reinforcement.
I love it. I thought you were leading up to a question. That's why I didn't stop you at first. But
hey, something for elementary teachers, because I know you're not all going to do Uber Eats. Virtual field trips. If we work for this number of minutes, we'll take a virtual field trip. There's a new panda at the National Zoo. And some of the websites, and Lisa may recall off the top of her head, some websites have pre-planned virtual field trips. Dance breaks are pretty popular, that we will work for 15 minutes, then we'll take a dance break. And that gets at another point Lisa was making about kids need to stand up and move around. And some things are group rewards. If we all work on this for 20 minutes, we will take 5 minutes and do this. I've seen people do lunch with the teacher for elementary and middle school, which might not sound so appealing to you, but for kids, it might be something that they would enjoy. I've also seen people opening up their Zoom classroom during the lunch break so that kids can come into the Zoom and they have a chance to just be with their friends and there's no instruction going on. So people are getting creative, and there are lots of other rewards people are doing. My reminder is, we need in general to have some very specific rewards, especially if you're working with kids who struggle. And if you're working with kids where motivation in the best of times is somewhat of an issue. Right now, we need to be sure that we are doing what we can to help kids be what we need, which is engaged and with us so they can learn.
I was trying to add things into the chat and listen, and yeah, I'm a multitasker, maybe not to the best for the moment, but those are great suggestions. And I did put my personal favorite website, which is the Discovery VR playlist. And if you haven't seen, they're $1.80. You can get the goggles. And I had a school that did a fund drive where people donated old iPods. And now kids at their desk can go on Discovery field trips. You can actually get bit by a shark. Highly don't recommend you watch that one if you have a fear of sharks. I can't even watch it. But what they did so well is they put it on YouTube so that if you don't have the ability or the funds to have a device, you can still see it and take kids different places. So that's my favorite. The other one, I think, Marilyn, you said so well, is getting kids engaged. And the work we've done in research in technology, there really is kind of an 80-20 principle, that when you go online, you cannot cover as much content. Yeah. And I think we've missed the Goldilocks principle in online, and we're just cramming more down the throat, and it's too hot and it's too cold and it's not just right. So do think about scaling back a little. We still want kids to learn, but what I think we do is we keep adding in this technology. And so don't add Discovery VR and Plickers and plates and all of that. Remember, for the kid just to show up online, that takes 20% of their bandwidth, and to turn their camera on. So think about carefully what you add and how you do that balance. And then the only other thing that I would just add there is I really like the reward system comment, Marilyn. And I even like to do self-monitoring, like have your phone go off every 5 minutes. And, you know, even the kid who lies, some reason they're really honest when they self-monitor, and have them put in the box. So personal chat to you. Did they give themselves a check plus minus, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Have all the kids do a thumbs up. You know, how did you do in the last 5 minutes? Oh, thumbs down. All right. So what are we doing to move that in the middle? We're not. I'm going to double thumb. So some kids are looking for attention. That's a way to give them attention.
Yeah.
And so thinking about that in the classroom, they would get that attention. How do you do that in brick and mortar? But I do think that we kind of missed the point that if you did it in brick and mortar, do it online.
Yeah. A very related point, Lisa, goes back to this notion of what kids are doing when they are sitting there and we're doing whole group. And this ties together the notion of kids self-monitoring, but also the notion of reward. Something, and this is a really good thing for student teachers. I'll just try to stitch all of this together. For student teachers to start to learn to do is to offer kids very specific feedback in private chat, especially during whole group instruction, so that if a kid was thumbs down that, you know, I wasn't paying attention when I was supposed to be, whatever it is, then the private chat is, thank you for being very honest when you shared how you did the past 5 minutes. Think about what to do next. When a kid has thumbs up or a student has given a really good answer, it's again, not ignoring the principles we know about what works best for kids. We don't chat, nice job. The chat is, your answer was exactly the main point that we wanted to make. Thank you. So that it has to be specific enough that kids understand what it is we're praising them for. And that it's almost like a teacher version of back channel. You know, it's almost teacher, and that's another piece for student teachers and special ed teachers if they are in those situations where, much as they wish they could do something different, they can't. And so it's whole group. What I hate is when I see special ed teachers being the postage stamp in the corner, you know, and here's another way that you can get around that problem.
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback on that comment because you said something that I just so believe is not only do kids need really specific feedback, Marilyn, I so agree with that. They also need to give back. And I'm a real big believer kids with disabilities need to be givers, not takers. And we've set a system up to help them more. So what I kept thinking is if I help this kid, then I'd say, hey, could you share with the group the answer to the next problem? Here it is. I just in the back channel set them up to be like a rocket scientist and say, hey, the next one's 52. I didn't care that the kid didn't think through the math concept at that moment. I cared later. But at that moment, I wanted that kid to feel good about themselves because earlier they were double thumbs down. And I think we do so much with co-teaching to have a chance to help kids almost too much that I want you to keep thinking, could they be your tech support? Could they be the person who knows the website? Could they be your audio guy or girl? You know, I think that's the other mistake we keep making is we've got to be sure that we're using this time to not only build kids up with positive praise, but saying you've got to be a giver, not a taker. And that's just one of my personal pet peeves. I truly believe, and I'm very proud of my son, he has a job and he's not on my payroll and he lives because he had so many opportunities to give back to others. But that's when I saw him the happiest. He was never happy whenever it was related to school. But if they ask him to volunteer in a room or to run a letter to the office, well, again, in Zoom, how do you do that? I think you have to think about what their strengths are and how you build that into your day. The last thing I would say there is something I did is I called it coming attractions. And I pre-taught mini lessons for 10 to 15 minutes before the big lesson so I could prime the pump, which is alternative teaching. But think about that. There isn't any reason if your class is from 10 to 11 and you happen to have 15 minutes of planning time or in the morning, kids could come to you and you could pre-teach them some of the content. That's that direct instruction kids need. And I think that's kind of what we're missing. Kids always feel bad if they're always playing catch up. But if we could do some more pre-teaching and alternative teaching, I think you'll see better outcomes for kids.
Lisa, you're mentioning alternative teaching. If we can, Sarah, are you okay if I stay on co-teaching approaches?
Yeah,
I hope everybody can track this conversation because boy, are we bouncing around.
No, but this is all wonderful, and I'm ready to just let you both riff. I don't want to interrupt any of this.
Well, the reason is this. In this environment, especially for early career or people with new partners, the relationships are harder to establish. It's harder with kids, even though I hope everybody's been working on that, those of you in classrooms by now. But some people have found that if right now co-teaching is not really happening, it's easier to start with 2 stations. I'll take this half, you take that half. I'm going to have both of you go to breakout rooms with the kids. As a special ed teacher, I might be doing skill work, backfill. We have lots of kids who missed a lot of things from last spring, doing my good old fashioned direct explicit instruction while my partner is doing the new content, especially if I am upper grade level and I'm not the content expert, the subject matter expert. Then the 2 of us switch rooms. Now, every student has been with a teacher the full time, but we've done 2 dimensions to the instruction, the skill and backfill and the new content. That's a lot simpler than trying to set up 3 at the beginning. I like the idea of the independent and the accountability and doing that, but there's nothing wrong with starting simple. Another reason to set it up in breakout rooms is this. Sometimes you find out that there are kids in the breakout rooms who really don't need what you're doing. They got it. The thing to do then is send them back to the main room with an assignment or something to read, or they go to the main room, but they can turn their screen off or do whatever, because then it's easier to shuffle everything around. If one's in the main room and one's in a breakout room, then what do you do with the kids you don't need to be seeing right then? So that's one on station teaching if people are looking for something to kind of streamline it. And Lisa mentioned alternatives. Something else that can work really well in virtual environments is double alternative, where it could be for pre-teaching, but it could also be I'm pulling kids to do formative assessment, work on a specific IEP goal. How about teach a strategy so that kids are not dependent on grown-ups for the rest of their lives and they become strategic learners, while my partner, I'll do older kids, is checking that kids have identified an appropriate claim and that they're citing the appropriate evidence to go with it. And we could have some kids who see one of us, 1 or 2 kids who may see neither of us during this time. We could have some kids who spend time with both teachers. I worry sometimes that there are kids who need a lot of teacher face time in order to move them along. And what we can do in a co-taught class with double alternative is arrange that time. So I'll toss those ideas in as well.
Oh, I love it.
And everything I'm sharing is coming from all the people I'm working with. I mean, people are doing such great creative things. Everybody had to pivot, and you can tell special ed world, man, everybody did.
Yeah, I also like the idea of a lot of the teachers that I'm seeing that I'm working with are using this strategy that you've both mentioned, where they make the kids an expert for a day in something, and they give them a segment, almost like a television show, where they'll work with them all week, and maybe on Friday they'll all do their spiel, where they utilize their interest areas or their talents or their hobbies, and they do a presentation to the class or teach them how to do something. And that's similar to what you were both talking about. Do you both mind just mentioning some more strategies, whether you've seen them or you've done research with co-teaching and paras? A lot of people in the chat and in the email prior to this have asked how to best utilize their paraprofessionals to support student engagement in this way. And I don't know if you want to discuss it in lieu of like Kagan strategies or online and Zoom. But I know a lot of teachers are teaching face-to-face and hybrid, or moving fluidly between both, where they're trying to live stream their class behind that little penalty box that you were talking about, and their paras might be home working with the kids in Zoom breakout rooms while they're teaching, face-to-face. So any ideas or strategies that you both might have would be welcome, I think, for our audience.
Marilyn, I'll let you start.
To me, this is a really tough one. because of the complexity of paras not being asked to carry out responsibilities that are above their pay grade and are beyond their ethical boundaries. I am most comfortable with paras in a virtual, if paras are in the virtual world, working with groups of kids after core instruction, possibly on backfill. For example, repeated readings. You know, the research on repeated reading is a little bit uncertain, seems to not increase fluency as much as it does comprehension, which I guess that's okay too. But maybe doing repeated readings with kids. I think paras can also gather data if they are told what to gather data on and it's all mapped out. I think paras have something that's appropriate for them to do is to monitor kids. Like if you do have an independent station and you kind of need someone to keep an eye on the individual kids, those are the types of things. I will tell you, and Lisa, maybe you have magic answers on this. The people that I'm interacting with are finding that it's really challenging right now to have paras have the right set of tasks that fill all the minutes.
I would agree with everything you said. That's exactly how I would use paras, and I agree that there's kind of this role. One of the things, the only other thing I have seen that might add to all the great things Marilyn has already said is some of that, what you said, backfill in chat. Like they could be monitoring, you know, Shepherd software sites for kids practicing their ABCs, and almost doing that as a plus, like class is over, the kid is done for the day in the hardcore class instruction. Now, could the para meet with them, not to teach them anything, but to work on a backfill skill using some kind of technology? I've seen that as the only other thing. And then I have seen some, you know, progress monitoring kinds of things, as you said, very specific, and maybe sending a class dojo point to the kid to keep them on task, or sending them a private message and checking their online presence. So I think that data collection, and I'm like Marilyn, you know, I'm in some districts where, you know, the para has a PhD and is retired and bored and came back, and I'm like, they could do anything, but for their pay and for the ethics of what they're supposed to do, that's the role we should be giving them, in my opinion.
And I should tell everybody that I was just working with a district where they're back in a hybrid format, but they have not allowed paraprofessionals to come back, and except like in the past week, because they're considered guests. Because they are not essential teaching personnel, and they haven't been allowed in the schools. So, oh my word. Boy, and if anybody has great para ideas, by all means, chime in, either type them in the chat box or something, because the para situation right now is kind of tough. Too easy to have a para working with a group of kids in a breakout room. And I think we got to be just really, really careful, especially if paras are working with general ed teachers and a special ed teacher is not present, that we don't end up, and this has happened, with the general ed teacher kindness. I don't think it's malicious, good heart, not the right outcome, saying, well, okay, I've taught, now you take those kids and go work on the skills, because that's really not, you know, we all know this, that's not the role for the para. So we've got to be very careful. I'd rather see a para gathering data than interacting with kids in a way that makes them accountable for things they shouldn't be. And especially if it's about general ed teachers, we got to remember the person who is to teach that child is the general ed teacher.
Right. Jennifer in the chat, I just have to point out what she wrote, because she had a great idea. Jennifer Sears, Dr. Jennifer Sears. She said her sister is a para this semester, and one of the things that she does is, as the teacher's writing things on the whiteboard in the Zoom, she's also writing the same thing on the Zoom whiteboard so that the remote students can still see. And I think that's a fantastic idea for a hybrid classroom.
Yeah.
And I also think that might be a great thing for that student who might be needing a task or a job, you know, to keep them busy. You know, I've worked with some students in classrooms where they will assign each of their kids like a job, whether they're in a breakout room or not. And some of them, it's to clarify, or if the teacher's giving instructions in the chat, they'll be putting step 1, do this, step 2, do this, you know, so that the students are writing it to each other, and they wind up almost running their own self-help group in the chat while the teacher's teaching, you know. And I love that idea to get them engaged, because they feel important, you know, they're practicing their writing, you know, and their task analysis skills. So that's just the one thing that I was thinking about. All right, thank you for talking about that, because I know we've had lots of questions about it. We don't have a ton of time. We have about 10 minutes left, but we did have 2 questions that were emailed earlier, and I know this has probably come up for a lot of us. A lot of people were talking about specifically working on social emotional skills, and previously tonight, or this afternoon, it's dark already here in Maine, so it feels like evening. Previously, you had talked about those soft skills. It's not all academic skills, you know, it's the social emotional skills, the friendship building skills, the interpersonal skills. And a lot of our kids have IEP goals specifically for these interpersonal skills, and they're harder to do in authentic ways in a non-face-to-face setting. So that was another question that came up. I don't know if we have, you know, the final answers, but I do know that we have a great group here, and the 2 of you might be able to brainstorm some ideas for how to create more authentic social interaction during downtime. You know, when you have a little bit less instructional time and maybe some time to kind of interact, whether it be for older kids in a study hall, or during that lunchtime where you might run typically like a friendship building group. You know, what can we do in virtual formats to authentic?
Lisa, I'll give this one to you as a start.
Sure. So I have a couple of thoughts there. Well, I think first of all, to teach social emotional, there's so many resources online. You know, I go with something like Wonder Grove Kids, using something like Classcraft, if you've not seen that, to put kids in teams so that they are held accountable to each other. I think we worry about putting them out in groups, but why couldn't they still have, I'm going to go off and do the art piece, and Marilyn's going to write the summary, and Sarah's going to, you know, make the clay model, and we're going to come back together, and we get points for each of us delivering that kind of piece. So I think that's something you can do offline. I think the other thing that I found very helpful with social emotional learning is 2 things. One, thinking about some kind of video modeling. So I know of a team that when kids are pulled out into their resource room and they miss some instruction, which happens, there's just, you know, so many hours in the day, through Seesaw, the brightest student in the class gives them a summary of not only what they did, but where they were doing it. We were in circle time, and so that when that kid comes back, he or she has a video model from a peer to hear what they were doing so they can be connected. And then my last one that I can think of is, we probably need to do a better job of understanding how kids are being connected outside and helping teach that to our students. Like if everybody in a high school was going to the basketball game, we would take our students with intellectual disabilities and encourage them to go to the basketball game. Well, nobody's going anywhere right now. But are they chatting? Are they FaceTiming? Are they Google Hangouting? You know, asking your class how they are getting together in a social environment that is still socially distanced, and teaching that skill to our kids, getting, just like we would with best buddies, getting somebody to invite them to a Google Hangout, but teaching them before they go, they don't talk the whole time, or they don't flip people off, or whatever we worry about. That's the kind of teaching we should be doing for the online world, and we should be doing that, period. But I think we think brick and mortar is so different than online. I think we build friendships like we would organically otherwise.
And if you are looking for something structured for during the instructional time, you know, because again, what Lisa said, of course, I think is just great. And that's what we have to do, is kind of coach kids in their social skills during this time. Trying a couple of things. You could try numbered heads together, which is a cooperative, it's a simple cooperative learning activity kids have to be okay working in a group of about 4, but it would be a way to put a teacher or put teachers into 2 of the groups. You would have, probably 5 or 6 groups going on, and coach while kids interacted with each other. It's where kids get into a group, they're numbered off 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a question, they have to come up with the answers. When they come back out of the breakout group, then teachers call on a student, call on a number, and any student with that number has to be prepared to answer. And the goal is a combination of luck and skill. The kids' purpose when they're in their small groups is to be sure every student in the group understands well enough to answer in case they get called. That works in a virtual environment, and it's a good way to teach. It's a good way to coach kids to be positive and to try to help each other. And then, people use all kinds of bonus structures for that. That's one thing to do. Another one is drawing on Lisa's idea about like having a student explain what was taught. If you're using any kind of video modeling, peer modeling, or sibling modeling, or teacher modeling of social skills, how about stick that sucker into Edpuzzle and annotate it so that you're asking your student questions about the skill. Everybody's used to using Edpuzzle for academics, but there's nothing that would stop you from modeling in the social arena and helping the student pick out what's important. So that would be another idea for you.
Sorry, I was muted. I like that idea of asking questions along the way during the video model, kind of those perspective taking questions, what do they think what do you think they're going to think of you if you say this or that, A or B, kind of a choice. I love that idea. So another, I know a lot of people are concerned about, we've talked a lot about Zoom and hybrid and remote, but a lot of people were also emailing and asking questions about those kids that don't show up on Zoom, and how, and again, I know this is an impossible riddle to solve, right? We have school teachers who are sending packets home or, delivering worksheets, the dreaded worksheets, but there's really not much else that a lot of the teachers can do if the kids can't get online. Or I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts on those problems.
Well, if it's because kids don't want to get online, we inherited our family home place in very rural Southern Virginia, and almost every day if we're on the roads, you follow a school bus, and the school bus is delivering food and packets.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
And it's not because kids don't want to be online. There is no online. There is none. And so that's one situation. If it's that kids don't want to be online, I don't know, a set of high school teachers I've worked with a lot, they find that they are texting kids in advance and saying, hey, I'd like to just touch base to see how things are going. Haven't heard from you in a while. What time would be good for me to call this afternoon? So they text and then they voice so that they're trying to build a relationship with the kids. I've also seen something that I don't think it has an evidence base of any sort, but I think it's worth thinking about. If you're in an area where you're really worried about kids, there's a recommendation out there floating around called 2x10. Spend 2 minutes every day, every school day for 10 days, connecting with a kid that you are very worried about, not about academics. Teachers know how to do that. How you doing? What's working? What's not? Because a number of people are reporting anecdotally that if you do that for 2 weeks, you're connected to the kid, and then the kid is much more likely to show up. Relationships, that's what makes them come.
Yeah, well said. And I'm going to just share what the teacher that I jumped in and did some sessions with, she not only had relationships, I mean, that was the advantage last year, you had them in brick and mortar, but she made it so easy for me as a co-teacher. She took attendance. She was a high school teacher. She took attendance every day by kids not looking around the room. They had to answer a question on Google Doc. So when COVID hit, they still had to answer a question on Google Doc. It was great. And the questions were like, you know, what superhero would you be? Which green vegetables should have never been invented? And what was wonderful for me is I didn't know these kids, but I got to read 100 some days of their answers. I felt like I knew them instantly. You know, is your ring finger bigger than your middle? You know, that. So think about things like that that are not just academic, that can help us get to know kids. And then my other one that I found really helpful just in my mind, I know the research on multiple intelligence and learning styles does not work. So you don't need to text me and tell me that doesn't, but it's a menu. It's a menu of choice for UDL. And I kept saying to myself, wow, if that kid isn't engaged, so I gave them a little survey on Thrively to find out their strengths. If you've not seen thrively.com, but I started saying things like, you know what, leave Zoom and walk outside or walk to a window or go somewhere and look at a cloud. Is it like the main character in the story? Is it different? Well, lady, there is no clouds. Okay, so is it like this? Maybe, you know, that kind of stuff. My name was Lady, by the way, the whole time. But it's that kind of connection and novelty that I think what we know is the brain when it's online likes novelty. I would scream once in a while and the kids are like, oh my gosh, but they turn their cameras on. I'm like, oh, I just saw a mouse. I didn't see a mouse, but it's that novelty piece that I think gets engagement. Right. And I think sometimes we think in online we can be boring. When in brick and mortar, when kids aren't engaged, you do something novel to get them engaged. So keep thinking about those being more alike than different, would be my quick thought.
As you're talking about the mouse, you know, pretending there was a mouse and screaming, it is a lot of improv, you know, it's theater. It really is trying to get your audience engaged. Well, that brings us to the end of our time. We have had more questions that we haven't been able to get to, and I apologize to those of you in the chat who have put your questions in there. I do want to thank you both for volunteering your time in the middle of a busy time, in the middle of a week. It is greatly appreciated by all of us. I know I'm speaking on behalf of all of our participants, so thank you both. I also want to let you know that we have another ISET panel, expert panel coming up on December 11th. And that is specifically talking about finding sources of friends and social emotional interaction during remote learning. And we have two experts from University of California, Los Angeles, who will be talking. They work at the Peers Institute there. But I think Lisa wanted to say one more thing.
I just wanted to say thank you. And if you get a chance, we do have a podcast. There was a question about kids with severe disabilities that Becky Hines and I are doing, and she's done a great job of kind of talking about that pretty regularly. So if that would be helpful to you, I just didn't want that question not to get answered because we just don't have time. And I wanted to thank Marilyn for the privilege of being with her on this webinar. She's really led the field, and it's nice to get a chance to lean on your shoulders.
Great hair, Lisa, great hair.
We're all
colored hair.
We're all
everybody. It's been great fun. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And Lisa, did you put the link to that webinar in the chat?
I did. I'll put it in there again. And thanks for all the thank yous.
Okay, I will share that on our website as well. Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for all your hard work on behalf of kids. It's been quite a roller coaster.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Bye.